There are names that are never spoken aloud across the Imperium, not out of fear or reverence or ritual silence, but because there are lips that no longer exist to speak them. Entire bloodlines erased so thoroughly that the very memory of their existence has been scorched away from every data slate, every cathedral archive, every manufactorum registry, every whispered family ledger passed down through generations. One day, they lived beneath the light of the Emperor's distant and terrible gaze. And the next, they were gone. Not slain, not executed, not exiled. Gone. As if the void had opened its jaws and swallowed not only their flesh, but the proof that they had ever drawn breath at all. Ask the wrong question in the wrong corridor, and the silence that follows does not merely warn you, it damns you. Because someone did ask once, someone always does. And whatever they learned, whatever truth about the Imperium or the Warp, or the Emperor himself bled into mortal comprehension, it was judged too dangerous for a universe already breaking under the weight of its own sins. And so the Inquisition cuts bloodlines the way a surgeon cuts away rot. Completely, mercilessly, quietly. If you are still here, still listening, still curious, then you are already closer to that silence than you think. There are sermons spoken in the great cathedrals that rise like mountains over Hive cities. Priests in crimson vestments raise relics and chant praises to the Emperor's eternal vigilance, and the crowds below echo those prayers with desperate, grateful voices. They believe the Emperor watches over them with love. They believe his gaze is warm. They believe his light is a promise of protection. But those who serve the Inquisition know a different truth. The Emperor's light is a blade, sharp enough to carve entire civilizations from history. Faith does not comfort them. Faith disciplines them. Faith is the weight that keeps their hands steady as they carry out the work no one else must ever know. Some whisper that the Emperor still sees everything, that his will guides the Inquisition directly, that the erasures are not mere bureaucratic tactics, but sacred acts of divine selection. Others say the Inquisition acts alone, authority derived from a dead god who cannot speak, each action a guess, a gamble, a hope that necessity has not twisted into something monstrous. But speculation itself is dangerous, and even these whispers are spoken only in closed chambers among minds long since accustomed to treading the blade edge between duty and damnation. Still, the idea lingers. The possibility that the Inquisition is not merely reacting to threat, but shaping the future of humanity in ways unseen. If a bloodline shows the vaguest shadow of corruption, a flicker of psyker potential not properly sanctioned, a hereditary dream pattern that brushes against forbidden visions, then the purge comes. Quietly. Perfectly. And the galaxy shifts by one imperceptible degree, nudging humanity away from a fate that might have unfolded 10 generations later. A child unborn might have been a saint, or a demon host, or something stranger still, something the Imperium does not have a word for. The Inquisition does not wait to find out. The doctrine requires conviction. Not belief, conviction burns belief away. Conviction is the steel that remains. Yet, even among the Inquisition, there are those who hesitate, those who wonder whether this path of silence, this relentless cutting away of possibility, is a salvation or a slow self-destruction. They do not speak these doubts aloud. They do not need to. The doubt itself is a dangerous shape inside the mind, and shapes have a way of being noticed. There are Inquisitors who have vanished, not to retirement, not to martyrdom, simply removed. Their names struck from archives. Their sigils no longer spoken in Ordos conclaves. Their former acolytes reassigned. Their legacies gone. If the Inquisition erases the unworthy among its own, then it proves only one thing. No one stands outside the doctrine, not even those who wield it. Because silence is not only a weapon, it is the environment in which the Imperium breathes. Above a hive world, the void churns in slow, eternal motion. Void ships drift along prescribed routes, carrying pilgrims, soldiers, grain, weapons, secrets. The choir of psychers aboard each vessel strains to touch the Astronomicon, their voices burning away their sanity one breath at a time. They are the arteries of the Imperium, and yet even they will never know how close they sail to things that should not be known. They are shielded not by faith, but by ignorance. The same ignorance that keeps a clerk from questioning a missing entry. The same ignorance that keeps a mother from remembering a child who never existed. The Imperium survives because its people do not know, and when one of them begins to know, even a little, even by accident, the Inquisition moves, sometimes with fire, sometimes with words, sometimes with the quiet closing of a door that will never open again. Always with finality. The doctrine is not a choice, it is the cost of survival. And survival, in this age of endless war and devouring dark, is all that humanity has left. But survival always has a price. And the price is paid in names, in histories, in bloodlines. The price is paid by those who never understood what they were dying for. Now, we leave the halls of Terra and travel outward, to one such bloodline. A family that did not know they were marked. A household that believed itself loyal, ordinary, dutiful. They were not heretics. They were not traitors. They were simply seen. And that was enough. There are sermons spoken in the great cathedrals that rise like mountains over hive cities. Priests in crimson vestments raise relics and chant praises to the Emperor's eternal vigilance, and the crowds below echo those prayers with desperate, grateful voices. They believe the Emperor watches over them with love. They believe his gaze is warm. They believe his light is a promise of protection. But those who serve the Inquisition know a different truth. The Emperor's light is a blade, sharp enough to carve entire civilizations from history. Faith does not comfort them. Faith disciplines them. Faith is the weight that keeps their hands steady as they carry out the work no one else must ever know. Some whisper that the Emperor still sees everything, that his will guides the Inquisition directly, that the erasures are not mere bureaucratic tactics, but sacred acts of divine selection. Others say the Inquisition acts alone, authority derived from a dead god who cannot speak, each action a guess, a gamble, a hope that necessity has not twisted into something monstrous. But speculation itself is dangerous, and even these whispers are spoken only in closed chambers among minds long since accustomed to treading the blade edge between duty and damnation. Still, the idea lingers. The possibility that the Inquisition is not merely reacting to threat, but shaping the future of humanity in ways unseen. If a bloodline shows the vaguest shadow of corruption, a flicker of psyker potential not properly sanctioned, a hereditary dream pattern that brushes against forbidden visions, then the purge comes. Quietly. Perfectly. And the galaxy shifts by one imperceptible degree, nudging humanity away from a fate that might have unfolded 10 generations later. A child unborn might have been a saint, or a demon host, or something stranger still, something the Imperium does not have a word for. The Inquisition does not wait to find out. The doctrine requires conviction. Not belief, conviction burns belief away. Conviction is the steel that remains. Yet, even among the Inquisition, there are those who hesitate, those who wonder whether this path of silence, this relentless cutting away of possibility, is a salvation or a slow self-destruction. They do not speak these doubts aloud. They do not need to. The doubt itself is a dangerous shape inside the mind, and shapes have a way of being noticed. There are Inquisitors who have vanished, not to retirement, not to martyrdom, simply removed. their names struck from archives, their sigils no longer spoken in Ordos conclaves, their former acolytes reassigned, their legacies gone. If the Inquisition erases the unworthy among its own, then it proves only one thing. No one stands outside the doctrine, not even those who wield it. Because silence is not only a weapon, it is the environment in which the Imperium breathes. Above a hive world, the void churns in slow, eternal motion. Void ships drift along prescribed routes, carrying pilgrims, soldiers, grain, weapons, secrets. The choir of psychers aboard each vessel strains to touch the Astronomicon, their voices burning away their sanity one breath at a time. They are the arteries of the Imperium, and yet even they will never know how close they sail to things that should not be known. They are shielded not by faith, but by ignorance. The same ignorance that keeps a clerk from questioning a missing entry. The same ignorance that keeps a mother from remembering a child who never existed. The Imperium survives because its people do not know, and when one of them begins to know, even a little, even by accident, the Inquisition moves, sometimes with fire, sometimes with words, sometimes with the quiet closing of a door that will never open again. Always with finality. The doctrine is not a choice, it is the cost of survival. And survival, in this age of endless war and devouring dark, is all that humanity has left. But survival always has a price. And the price is paid in names, in histories, in bloodlines. The price is paid by those who never understood what they were dying for. Now, we leave the halls of Terra and travel outward to one such bloodline. A family that did not know they were marked. A household that believed itself loyal, ordinary, dutiful. They were not heretics. They were not traitors. They were simply seen. And that was enough. If this world of forbidden knowledge and half-buried history catches your breath the way it does mine, then stay with me. Like the Vox scribes say, like, share, subscribe, keep this lumen burning, because the moment it goes dark, we do not get it back. Their home was a modest dwelling in the lower reaches of Hive, a place where the walls sweated condensation, and the air always carried the faint taste of metal, machine oil, and recycled breath. The father, Marek Halden, worked as a quality inspector in a manufactorum that stamped lasgun power packs by the tens of thousands each day. He was neither exceptional nor flawed, just a man shaped by routine, shoulders stooped from years of labor, eyes dulled to the monotonous glow of conveyor lines. His wife, Alira Halden, served as a Vox recording attendant for the local administratum branch. Her voice carefully measured and her posture always correct. Trained to speak clearly and forget everything she heard the moment after she filed it away. Their life was predictable, regulated, safe, in the way that safe can only exist in a hive that never sleeps and never forgives. They had one daughter, Lysa, 12 years old, thin as a filament wire, and quiet. The kind of child who learns to listen long before she learns to speak. There was nothing remarkable about her at first. She attended Schola lessons, memorized her catechisms, recited the mandated litanies of devotion to the Emperor with precise clarity. But at night she dreamed, and dreams in the Imperium are never private. The first dream was simple. A corridor of gold, endless, gleaming, silent. She walked alone, yet she felt something watching her, not a presence of malice, but a weight of attention so immense it made her bones ache when she woke. She told no one. Children dream. Dreams mean nothing. That is what her mother had always said. But then she dreamed again, and again, and she began to speak of the figure she saw at the end of that corridor. A figure seated upon a throne of light so bright she could not see its face, only the radiance that poured off it like dawn. She said it was beautiful. She said it was kind. She said it whispered her name, not aloud, but inside her mind, like a memory she had always carried. Her parents did not panic. Piety was encouraged. Religious fervor was celebrated. Many pilgrims dreamed of the emperor's glory. The ecclesiarchy rewarded such testimonies. At first, Marek and Alira simply smiled and told her to describe the visions to the Schola priests. But the priests did not smile. The priests grew very quiet. They asked questions. Too many questions. Questions about lineage, ancestry, whether there had ever been psychers in the family. The parents answered truthfully, none. They were pure, unremarkable citizens, devoted, obedient. The priests smiled, but it was the wrong kind of smile. It did not reach their eyes. From that day forward, the Haldens were watched. Not obviously, not with patrols or interrogations, just observed. An unfamiliar figure in the Hab corridor, a Vox line that clicked before connecting, a census officer requesting a second verification of residency, the small, feather-light alterations that suggest scrutiny without revealing its source. Marek told himself they had done nothing wrong. That loyalty would protect them. That truth would shield them. But loyalty is not armor, and truth does not save. The third dream changed everything. Lisa woke screaming, her voice raw like something had been torn out of her. Alira rushed to her bedside and tried to hold her, but the girl thrashed as though fighting off something invisible. When she finally calmed, she did not cry. She only stared, hollow-eyed, into the dark and said, "He turned away from me." That was all, those 6 words. No child should speak them. No priest should hear them. No inquisitor should ignore them. Because there are many dreams of the emperor, many visions, many interpretations. The ecclesiarchy teaches that to see him is to be blessed, but to see him turn away is something else entirely. Something that suggests a connection unmediated by doctrine, a contact without sanctioned prayer, a thread that bypasses the machinery of worship and touches the divine directly. Such things are not allowed. Such things are not safe. Not for the dreamer, not for the Imperium. Within 72 hours, the Haldens' names were flagged in the local administratum index. Their genetic lineage data was cross-referenced across 47 archives. A quiet requisition order was filed. A sealed directive, coded under Ordo Malleus Protocol, marked their bloodline for review. Review, in this context, did not mean conversation. Review meant observation from a distance, patterns tracked, behavior measured, dreams recorded, fate assessed. No accusation was spoken. No accusation needed to be spoken. It was enough that the possibility existed. The Haldens did not know they were already doomed. They still attended work. They still attended prayer. They still sat together over their evening meal. But something had already shifted. The silence had begun to gather around them. A silence that waited, patient as a blade on the table, gleaming but unused. For now. There were small things first, the kind that slip beneath conscious notice, like the subtle flavor of a toxin diluted in water. The Haldens' neighbors no longer greeted them with the lazy half-nods exchanged among tired workers who have long run out of words. The greetings simply disappeared, replaced by averted gazes and hurried footsteps. Not avoidance exactly, more like caution, as though the Haldens carried something contagious, something invisible but feared. The air felt different in the corridor outside their door, heavy and expectant, as if sound itself moved more slowly there. Marek noticed it in the manufactorum. Supervisor Grent stopped asking him to oversee new workers. The routine security audits that he once led with quiet pride were reassigned. He found his punched access code no longer opened certain wings of the line. No one explained. No one accused. No one said he had done anything wrong. The procedures simply moved around him, like a tide, parting around a stone that had become inconvenient. For Alira, it was the notices. She processed thousands of Vox-recorded reports each cycle, stamping them with proper indexing and clearance tags before filing them into the endless ocean of administratum documentation. The work required precision, but not thought. She had grown accustomed to letting the words wash through her without absorbing them, the way the ecclesiarchy intended. But one shift, she received 3 messages regarding her own section. Each bore a small sigil in the corner, a stylized eye with 3 crossbars. She froze when she saw it. The sigil was faint, not meant to draw attention, but she had spent years processing communications. She knew the symbols of intra-bureaucratic oversight. This one did not belong to any local office, any subdepartment, any noble house. It belonged to the Ordos. She whispered a prayer as she indexed the messages, though she could not recall which saint she invoked. Her hands shook only slightly. Only she noticed. She told no one, but Lysa felt it. Children sense tension the way nerves sense heat. They know when the world becomes brittle. She grew quiet, not the contemplative quiet she had always possessed, but a hollowed quiet, like the silence of a cathedral after the candles have burned out. She stopped speaking of her dreams. She stopped sleeping deeply at all. She sat awake at night, staring at the far wall, eyes wide, breathing slow and shallow, as if listening for something only she could hear. One evening, she whispered to her mother, voice thin as thread, "He won't look at me anymore." Alira held her, because she did not know what else to do. She stroked her daughter's hair and whispered prayers, but the prayers sounded false. They felt like repeating a story whose ending she suddenly feared to remember. Marek tried to rationalize. Stress, perhaps, or exhaustion. Children in the Hive saw too much and processed too little. Dreams were dreams. The ecclesiarchy taught that faith was a shield, a fortress, a torch. But in the quiet hours of third shift, while he lay awake beside his sleeping wife, Marek found himself staring into the darkness and thinking about how fragile the human mind truly is. How easily faith can fracture. But Lysa was not fracturing. Something else was happening. On the 15th night after the third dream, she woke again. But this time she was silent. She simply sat up and walked to the center of the room, bare feet tapping lightly against the cold floor. Alira woke without knowing why and turned toward her daughter. The lumen shard from the hallway cast a dim, fractured glow across Lisa's face. Her eyes were glowing. Not with fire, not with warp light, not with anything dramatic or monstrous, just glowing. A faint, soft radiance, as though reflecting a light no one else could see. She lifted her hand, fingers slowly curling, as if reaching toward something hovering beyond mortal sense. Alira, whispered Lisa's name. Lisa did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice was distant. Not dreamy, not entranced, aware, angelic, terrified. "He sees all of us," she murmured. "All of us, all the time. But he is so far away, too far. He is burning and burning and burning." The glow faded. She collapsed into her mother's arms, drained. No diseases can cause that, no fevers, no hallucination, no exhaustion. There are only 2 explanations in the Imperium for such phenomena. One is a psyker awakening. The other is a warp-touched corruption. Both are death sentences. By dawn, 3 robed figures stood at the Schola gates, bearing sigils no one dared speak aloud. They did not announce their purpose. They did not need to. They spoke to the head priest for less than a minute. The priest did not argue. The priest did not question. The priest only bowed, The Inquisition had arrived. They did not come for Lysa. Not yet. They came to watch. Because now the Inquisition cared about one question only. Was the child a vessel of faith or a doorway? They did not reveal themselves to the Haldens at first. The Inquisition rarely does. To announce presence is to distort observation, and what they needed now was clarity, untainted by fear or performance. So, they observed, quietly, precisely, from angles the family could not perceive. One agent stood at the far end of the manufactorum floor, dressed as a routine efficiency auditor, marking performance patterns on a data slate. Another blended into the mid-tier administratum registry office, returning stamped vox logs to shelves already organized beyond perfection. A third walked the Schola halls during instruction, hands clasped behind her back, face like carved stone, watching the children recite their prayers. No one questioned them, no one dared. When the Inquisition chooses to be invisible, it is invisible. When it chooses to be seen, it is already too late. Marek noticed the auditor. Of course he did. He had spent 20 years learning the rhythm of his manufactorum line. He knew when something in the air changed. The auditor never spoke, never intervened, never corrected. He only watched Marek. Always Marek. Marek worked more carefully, more precisely, more slowly, and the more he tried to pretend nothing was wrong, the more wrong everything felt. Alira noticed the new clerk shelving records. She recognized the posture of someone trained to observe without appearing to do so. The breaths spaced evenly, the footfalls placed deliberately. Administratum scribes did not move like that. Soldiers did. Priests did sometimes when they were afraid. But the quiet women of the Ordos, they moved like inevitability. Lisa noticed the woman at the Schola, the one with no expression, the one whose eyes never left her. Each time Lisa's lips formed prayers, those eyes measured the cadence, the hesitation, the tremor of breath. Lisa began speaking her litanies slower, as though searching for a rhythm that would be correct, that would appease something she did not understand. But there is no correct rhythm once the Inquisition has taken interest. There is only the search for flaws. One evening, as third shift deepened into the false night of the Hive, a soft, vibrating hum filled the small living space of the Halden dwelling, the kind that precedes a vox chime. But no chime followed. The vox unit flickered. Twice, then steadied. Someone was listening, not speaking. Listening. Marek and Alira exchanged a glance. No words. Words were dangerous now. Even air felt dangerous. And across the room, Lisa sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the vox like it were an animal watching her from the dark. The Inquisition doesn't always need records or visible corruption to act. Sometimes all it needs is resonance, patterns, echoes. The warp is not loud, it is subtle. It whispers through cracks in the psyche, through dreams, through inherited fears. Those attuned to it do not choose to be. They do not want to be. They simply are. And in a universe where the warp hungers for minds like a starving beast, that is enough to place a family under the weight of an executioner's judgment. But not all agents of the Inquisition believe in unspeaking obliteration. Some believe in tests. So the first test came quietly. In the Schola, Lisa's class was instructed to recite the litany of the Golden Sight, a common catechism. It praises the Emperor's radiance. It emphasizes obedience to the ecclesiarchy and warns against knowledge sought through dreams. Children recite it every day across 1,000,000 worlds. But this time, something was different. When Lysa reached the final stanza, her voice changed. Not louder, not softer, just deeper, weighted, as though something vast and distant spoke through her lungs. The words she spoke were correct, perfect. but they did not sound like a child praying. They sounded like a memory. The Schola priest froze. The woman from the Inquisition did not. She watched. She took in the cadence, the tone, the lack of fear. She blinked once, very slowly, as though confirming something she had suspected. When Lisa finished, silence lingered in the room for a breath too long. Then the priest praised her. Quietly, shakily. No one else noticed the way his hands trembled. That night, the woman from the Inquisition followed the family home. She moved through the hive with the grace of a blade being unsheathed, cloaked in ordinary cloth, invisible by design. She stood outside the Halden's unit door for several minutes before entering, not by force, but by code. Their door recognized her authority, because the Imperium had always planned for this. Inside, she watched as Lisa slept. She watched for signs. She listened to her breathing, the cadence of her dreams. Her presence should have gone unnoticed, but Lisa woke. She did not startle, she did not cry. She simply opened her eyes, pupils wide and unblinking. "You're here for us," she whispered. The woman did not reply. "Not because of something I did," the child said, "but because of what I might become." The silence between them was absolute, a silence with teeth. The woman's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition, confirmation. The test was complete. The conclusion was inevitable. The erasure would come, soon. The next morning unfolded with a terrible, deceptive normalcy. The boiler lines in the Hab district groaned awake, exhaling warm, chemical-tinted steam that filtered through grated vents. Workers shuffled through the corridors on their way to shift rotations, their faces slack with exhaustion and habit. The Haldens joined them, though each step felt like walking through water thickened with dread. No one spoke of the night. No one acknowledged the presence they had felt, like a shadow folded into the walls themselves. Silence had become a second skin around them now, too tight to remove. Something in the hive had already decided their fate. Merrick worked, but his gaze flicked too often toward the upper gantries. The auditor was gone. Not reassigned, gone. The kind of absence that leaves an indentation in memory, like a weight removed. Marek knew enough now to understand that absence was not relief. Absence was judgment completed. Alira arrived at the administratum office to find her workstation replaced by a smaller one at the far rear of the chamber. No explanation, no reprimand, just the quiet, clerical shifting that always precedes something irreversible. She did her work without speaking, without breathing too deeply, without allowing her thoughts to gather shape. Lisa did not go to Schola. There had been no directive, no order delivered. Yet she stayed home. Her parents didn't question it. They simply let the day pass, as though they could prolong a world already ending by pretending not to feel the gravity pulling them toward the abyss. By dusk cycle, the corridor outside their unit had grown too quiet. Hive corridors are never truly silent. There are always footsteps, voices, arguments, machinery, distant echoes of labor. But now, there was only stillness, a waiting stillness, the kind that falls when every witness has been removed. Marek locked the door. Alira bolted it. Lisa sat on the floor again, hands folded lightly in her lap, eyes open and distant, as though she were listening through walls and bodies and worlds to something calling from unimaginable distance. Then, 3 soft knocks. Not loud, not forceful. Soft, measured. Each one spaced exactly the same. The sound of someone who does not need to demand entrance. Someone who knows entrance is inevitable. Marek's breath stopped. Alira's fingers dug into the metal edge of the table. Lisa didn't move at all. The door slid open on its own. The same woman entered, the one from the Shola. She did not wear armor, she did not brandish a weapon. Her hands were empty. Her expression unchanged. She stepped into the room with the unhurried certainty of a surgeon entering a theater where the patient has already been prepared. Behind her came two others. One wore the matte black of the Ordo Malleus. The other, the heavily warded armor of a silent psyker handler, his face concealed by a blank helm of polished obsidian, no features at all. No words were spoken, none were needed. Marek stepped forward, because fathers do, even when they are already defeated. His voice trembled with the last fragile strands of hope. She is only a child. The Inquisitor, for she could be nothing else, looked at him, and for a moment her eyes were almost gentle. Yes, she said, and that is why we act now. No hatred, no cruelty, no triumph, just the truth of necessity. Alira pressed her hands to her mouth. Her knees buckled, but she did not plead. She knew pleading would be useless. The Imperium does not negotiate with fate. Lisa finally rose to her feet, slowly, gracefully, as though she had always known this moment would come. And perhaps she had. Her eyes met the Inquisitors, not with fear, with understanding. "I didn't choose this," she whispered. "No one ever does," the Inquisitor replied. The psyker handler stepped forward, his presence a void that consumed all warmth from the air. The room dimmed. Reality thinned at the edges. The warp stirred, subtle but undeniable, like a breath inhaled too sharply in a silent room. Lysa drew a sharp, pained breath. Something inside her answered. But before the stirring could take shape, before the first shimmer of psyker awakening could bloom, the Inquisitor placed her hand gently on the child's head, a gesture like a blessing or an ending. Lisa exhaled, a soft, tired sound, and her body became still. No violence, no spectacle, just absence, sudden and total, like a candle extinguished by a whisper of air. Alira collapsed to her knees, grief tearing through her silently because sound had abandoned her completely. Marek froze, a statue carved from loss. The psyker handler lowered his helm, sealing the quiet moment as something sacred or something dreadful. The Inquisitor looked at them, truly looked at them, for the first time. "This is mercy," she said, and she believed it. The erasure would come next, the records, the bloodline, the memory. It would be as though Lysa Halden had never drawn breath in the Imperium of man, the rot. Within the blood was not corruption, it was potential, and potential is the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The silence that followed was not empty, it was absolute, a silence that erased, a silence that ended. There are many who imagine the Inquisition as a single thing, a hammer, a pronouncement, a terrible voice that echoes across worlds and makes them kneel, but the Inquisition is not a voice. It is an anatomy, a vast, invisible body made of nerves and nerve endings, reflexes sharpened beyond conscious thought. Its agents are not soldiers. Soldiers act with force. These act with finality. They do not march, they do not shout, they do not proclaim, they remove. And what is removed leaves behind no wound, because wounds can be traced. They leave behind absence, which cannot be healed, because there is nothing to grasp. Valina Soreth had long ago learned to think of herself in these terms. She did not remember when she had first been recruited, not truly. Those memories had been burned out of her like impurities smelted away in a forge. She remembered fragments, a cathedral collapsing, a psyker screaming, the taste of iron and incense, and a voice, cold and calm, telling her that duty would make her more than she had been. Duty had done exactly that. She served under the sigil of the Ordo Malleus, but she was not an Inquisitor. Not yet. She was the hand that moved before command was spoken. One of many acolytes shaped through long years into something precise. Her steps were soundless. Her breath controlled. Her thoughts disciplined into narrow corridors where no doubt could linger long enough to form into treason. There was no ceremony after the Holden girl's death. No incense, no scripture. The family remained frozen in grief's silent crucifixion while Valina and the psyker handler worked. She moved through the home like a physician tending a body already pronounced dead. Her hands were quick but gentle. She collected personal effects, photographs, letters, data slates, not to preserve them, to catalog them for erasure. The psyker handler stood motionless in the doorway, helm reflecting the faint lumen glow. He did not interfere, he did not need to. His presence ensured the veil between mind and warp did not widen in the aftermath. Children with unmanifested psyker potential sometimes leave echoes when they die. Echoes attract things. Valina worked until everything of the child's existence could be indexed. Then she stepped to the Vox unit and transmitted a single code string. It carried no emotion, no explanation. It did not need to. Within hours, administratum archives across the Hive would begin updating. Registers would shift. Gene sequencing logs would be sealed. Work schedules would be altered to account for one fewer family. And the Hive would continue, uninterrupted, the machine adjusting itself around the absence. Meanwhile, the Haldens sat in stunned stillness. Not resisting, not understanding. Their world had narrowed to a single point of incomprehensible loss. But grief is loud, and loudness attracts attention. Valina knew this. She knew what would follow if the next steps were not taken swiftly. She knelt in front of them, not as mercy, not as pity, but as acknowledgement of a necessary cruelty. "You will not be punished," she said. Her voice was quiet. Her voice was a blade wrapped in silk. "You did nothing wrong." Marek stared at her without seeing. Alira shook, not from cold, but from the effort of trying not to scream. Valina continued, "You will be relocated. Your names will be reassigned. You will remember her only in dream. And even those dreams will fade." Alira's eyes flicked up, and in them was a flicker of realization so sharp it could cut through bone. "You're not here to kill us," she whispered. "No," Valina said. "Killing is simple." She let the word settle, heavy, inescapable. "We are here to remove the possibility of remembrance." The psyker handler finally moved. A single gloved hand raised. The air seemed to thicken. Warp presence, controlled, directed, not to harm, to dissolve. Memory is a pattern, and patterns can be erased like any script. Not all at once, not violently, but with a slow, careful unmaking that preserves function while removing meaning. Alira sobbed, soundless, because the tragedy was not death. It was the knowing that soon she would not even remember what she had lost. This was the cruelty deeper than execution. This was the blade that left no wound. Valina stood. Her duty was not to question. Her duty was to complete. No pride, no remorse. Only the steady, practiced calm of someone who had walked this path so many times the steps had worn grooves into her soul. She left the Halden home with the same silence she had entered. Outside, the Hive hummed, oblivious and eternal. Conveyor belts ran. Pilgrims prayed. Dust drifted through the air like gray snow. No screams echoed behind her. Screams belonged to a world where memory remained, and this was a world where memory had been removed. The work was done, but something followed her. Not sound, not movement, a thought, a single impossible whisper that should not have existed. The Emperor is burning. She stopped mid-step. She turned. The night did not change, but silence had. Valina did not breathe for a moment. She did not need to. The body can wait when the mind is held taut by something it does not yet understand. The whisper had not passed through her ears. It had not come from memory. It had arrived from somewhere deeper, a vibration within the bones, as if spoken by marrow rather than voice. She scanned the corridor, eyes narrowing. Nothing moved. No shifting shadows. No psyker resonance. No trace of warp distortion. And yet the thought lingered in her mind, suspended like a drop of oil swirling atop still water. The Emperor is burning. She had heard that cry before once, many years ago, in a chapel of black stone, far from any world that now appeared on Imperial maps. A psyker there had dreamt of golden light and screamed themselves into ash. Valina remembered the scent, incense and charred hair. She remembered the Inquisitor who had stood beside her, unflinching, explaining that some visions are not heresy, but instability, that the Emperor's pain is not to be understood, that attempting to understand is what cracks minds open for the warp to pour through. She remembered accepting that answer. She did not accept it now, not because she doubted the doctrine, but because doubt implies desire for an alternate truth. Valina did not desire anything. She simply recognized the whisper as something that should not have remained after the child's death. Lisa Halden was gone. Utterly, no echo should remain. So for an echo to remain meant that something had not been erased, or something had resisted erasure. Valina walked, not quickly, not slowly, purposefully. Her boots made no sound even in the metal-worn hallway. She did not reach for a weapon. Weapons solve problems of flesh. This was not a problem of flesh. The psyker handler followed her, silent as always. He had felt nothing. His helm's wards would have shielded him even if the warp had screamed. He walked because she walked. He obeyed because obedience was all he had left. She reached the transport platform and signaled for descent. The lift cage dropped through layers of Hive architecture, from crowded worker habs to the administrative undernetworks where authorized personnel existed in strange half-light and constant vigilance. The deeper one descended, the less the Hive felt like a city and the more it felt like something buried, a machine vast enough to contain generations of lives without ever knowing them. Valina walked into a chamber controlled by the Ordo Malleus, a place of processing, not interrogation, a place where incoming reports, omens, psychic tremors, and mutation sightings were sorted and classified. Servers hummed. Vox lines whispered. Hollow projections flickered from one classification to another. It was not loud, but it was never silent. She moved to a recessed terminal and entered a cipher that should never have been used lightly. Records opened. Recent events scrolled before her eyes. The Halden bloodline had already begun dissolving from existence. Their census entries had warped into new forms. Their workplace assignments reassigned. Their dwelling units scheduled for reassignment to newly arrived laborers. All of it unfolding smoothly, perfectly. No trace of anomaly, no trace of a child who dreamt of a golden corridor, no trace of a whisper. Valina's jaw tightened. She did not hesitate. She entered her sigil authority and searched deeper, not for names, but for psychic residue patterns, emotional imprints, dream signatures. The Imperium tracked such things, though not publicly. It had to. Psyker awakenings were not events. They were symptoms. One result matched. A faint pattern, barely measurable. A psychic echo, like a child's handprint left in cooling wax. It was not warp-tainted. It was not chaotic. It was something else, something luminous, something mournful. She stared at the reading for a long moment, feeling the skin at the back of her neck tighten, not in fear, in recognition. The Emperor is burning. That whisper had not been a remnant of corruption. It had been sorrow. The child had not seen a demon pretending to be divine. She had seen the Emperor himself in her dreams. Not literally, not physically. That would be impossible. That would break everything known. But psychers sometimes glimpse, not what is in the throne room, not what exists, but the shape of suffering so intense that it becomes the astronomican itself. Valina closed her eyes. If the Inquisition had erased a child touched by the Emperor's fragmented radiance, then the act had been correct, necessary. For even a glimpse of such magnitude would destroy every belief structure that held the Imperium together. The Emperor cannot be seen as suffering. He must be seen as triumphant, unwavering, eternal. Because if humanity knew what their God truly endured to light their path across the void, they would break. Faith would collapse into despair. Hope would rot into guilt. And despair is a doorway wider than any warp rift. Valina opened her eyes again. Her conviction did not waver. The erasure had been necessary, but necessary did not mean finished, because if the child had heard the Emperor's suffering, then the echo did not originate from the child. It originated from something else tied to the bloodline, something still living, something not yet erased, something that must be found. Valina lifted her vox-link. "Begin the secondary sweep," she said. Her voice was quiet, controlled, absolute. "No survivors," she added. The silence that followed was agreement. No survivors did not mean death. It meant no memory, no question, no trace. This was the blade without witness. This was the hand that moved before anyone understood it had moved at all. The secondary sweep did not arrive like a storm. Storms are loud, they announce themselves, they warn, even as they destroy. The sweep moved like dusk, settling gradually, invisibly, until the world realized too late that something had been lost in the fading of the light. Valina led the team because this was her burden, her precision, her responsibility. She did not delegate when the integrity of silence itself was at stake. The psyker handler remained at her side, a sentinel of controlled void pressure. 2 more operatives joined them, one armored in the matte black plates of sanctioned repression forces, helm sealed, demeanor emotionless. The other cloaked, carrying no weapon but the authority to overwrite identity itself. A remembrancer killer, trained to erase memory not with psionics, but with narrative replacement, altered records, and manufactured history. The cleanest of knives. They moved not toward the Halden dwelling. There was no need to return there, but outward, into the Hive's old arteries. There were always relatives somewhere. Cousins, aunts, co-workers who had shared stories and exchanged prayers long enough to hold fragments of familial familiarity. Such bonds were weak, usually harmless, but bonds could become roots, and roots could bear fruit. The Inquisition removed roots. The first location was a worker dormitory 3 strata down, where Marek's brother lived among other lasgun line inspectors. They found him at his bunk, lacing his boots, preparing for shift rotation. He looked up when the operatives entered. His face registered only confusion, the dull, unarmored kind of confusion that belongs to someone who has lived his entire life without ever imagining that the universe might notice him. "Something wrong?" he asked. Valina did not speak. The psyker handler moved forward, placed a gloved hand lightly against the man's temple. No struggle, no plea, just a slow softening of expression as the memory thread unwound and dissolved. The man blinked once, twice, then exhaled faintly as though forgetting what task he had been performing. He was not dead. He would continue living, he would go to work, he would follow routine. he would remember nothing of Marek Halden, nothing of a niece, nothing of a family. His life had simply been reauthored around absence. The operatives moved on. The next was less simple. Alira's sister was a Schola instructor, an educated woman, disciplined and perceptive. She noticed the cloak before the team had crossed the threshold of her classroom. Her eyes widened. She understood, and understanding is always the most dangerous moment. She did not run. Running is a confession. She closed the door behind her students and faced Valina with hands clasped. Her voice was steady, though her throat worked once in a quiet swallow. She was just a child, she said. Valina met her gaze. She was an opening. The woman inhaled sharply, not in rejection, but in comprehension. She had studied liturgies on sanctioned miracles. She had studied histories of the unspoken catastrophes of psyker outbreaks. She understood in that instant the shape of what had happened. She understood why the Inquisition had come. That was the problem. Understanding spreads. Valina stepped forward. So did the psyker handler. The woman did not resist. That made it easier. Kinder, perhaps. The handler's helm inclined. Pressure shifted. The radiance of the warp shivered faintly at the edge of the world. Then the woman's eyes softened. Her posture loosened. Her mind quieted. Her memories of Lysa, of the Halden name, of every shared meal and childhood laugh and whispered prayer. Inhaled once, then dissipated like incense ash in cathedral air. She remained living. She remained teaching. She remained loyal. But she no longer remembered that she had ever been anything else. That was the work. They moved again and again, dozens of places. Dozens of lives adjusted, like tuning the strings of a great, fragile instrument. Not altered violently, not damaged, simply retuned to a key that no longer included a girl who once dreamt of a golden corridor. The Hive did not remember her. The Hive did not miss her. The Hive continued. And yet, when the sweep completed, when every trace of the Halden line had dissolved into the endless gray sea of Imperial anonymity, the whisper returned. Not inside Valina's skull this time. In the air, soft, like a breath. Like someone standing just behind her shoulder. He is burning. Valina did not freeze. Freezing is a form of fear. She turned. The corridor behind her was empty. The psyker handler did not react. He had heard nothing. He had sensed nothing. Which meant the echo was not warp-tainted. It was something else. Something the wards could not classify. Something that did not come from beyond. Something that came from within, not from a demon, not from memory, not from the dead, but from the source all psychers draw from without ever understanding, the Astronomicon. The Emperor's suffering cast across the galaxy like light through stained glass. Valina closed her eyes, not in prayer, in recognition. Silence is a blade, but even blades can begin to tremble. Valina stood in the corridor for a long moment, listening to the silence settle again, as though the Hive itself had exhaled. The psyker handler waited beside her, still as an iron statue, but she felt his attention shift. Even without words, even without visible expression, those who walked the blade edge between the material and immaterial learned to recognize when a companion sensed that something subtle had changed. Not a threat, not yet, but an imbalance. A vibration in the latticework of what should have been final. There were procedures for this, protocols established in the earliest days of the Ordos, when humanity first learned how to conceal the evidence of the warp without collapsing beneath the weight of denial. Valina followed them precisely, because precision was all that kept duty from unraveling into heresy. She traced the echo, not physically but through administratum lines, emotional imprints, faint impressions in habit path patterns. She moved through the hive like a memory passing back through the mind that conceived it. The psyker handler remained behind, holding the psychic space stable, preventing the echo from multiplying or developing satellite resonance. Valina's path led her back to the Schola. Of course it did. The place where the whisper first began. The place where faith and identity form beneath the guidance of liturgy and repetition. The place where children learn not who they are, but who they must be. The Schola was silent when she entered. Evening prayers had ended. The halls smelled of parchment, stone polish, and recirculated incense. She walked past rows of small wooden desks, all identical, all arranged with monastic precision, and there, at the front, was the child's empty seat. Not truly empty, absence is never empty. It holds shape, weight, echo. The whisper did not speak again. It didn't need to. Its presence had already traced a delicate pattern through this place, like a hand brushing the surface of still water, sending ripples outward. Valina stepped closer. Her boots made no sound on the stone floor. She placed her hand atop the desk, fingers resting lightly on the grain, as though feeling for heat left by someone who had only just risen. She did not close her eyes. She did not need to. The echo was not sensory, it was structural. The air held a residual stillness, a silence saturated with meaning. Some echoes cling to matter, some cling to emotion. This one clung to possibility. The Emperor is burning. Valina inhaled once through her nose, slow and even, until her mind grew quiet. Her thoughts narrowed into a single filament thread of purpose, tensioned perfectly between certainty and awareness. Then she exhaled. The echo faded, not erased, placed, filed, stored, not gone, but contained. She withdrew her hand from the desk and turned away. She did not need to look back. She understood now what had remained. The child had not become a vessel. She had not opened a rift. She had not been corrupted. She had been near. That was all. Near enough to brush against a truth no mortal mind is meant to carry. A truth too immense to be processed, too terrible to be believed, too sacred to be spoken aloud. The Emperor was suffering. Millions of psychers across the Imperium feed the Astronomicon every day with their lives. Choirs burn away their sanity one fractured hour at a time, keeping the beacon lit through devotion, agony, and unrelenting discipline. But the ordinary citizenry cannot know what fuels the light guiding humanity through the void. They must believe the Emperor directs it through triumphant will. They must believe he is unbroken. A dream that shows him burning is not heresy, it is truth. Truth is always more dangerous than falsehood. Valina left the Schola and climbed toward the upper maintenance passages of the Hive. The air grew warmer as she ascended, ducks thrum-drumming with the heartbeat of the city. She stepped onto an open walkway suspended above an abyss of machinery and habitation layers, where light filtered through dozens of kilometers of smog and dust. She stood there, alone. The handler had not followed. He did not need to. This was the moment reserved for those who served the blade. Valina looked into the unfathomable depths of the Hive and let the truth settle in her, not as emotion, not as belief, but as something quieter. Understanding. The child had glimpsed a suffering too vast for humanity to bear. The Inquisition had acted to prevent the galaxy from learning what the girl had seen. The erasure had been necessary. And yet, something within Valina had shifted. Not cracked, not weakened, simply realigned. A slight adjustment of the internal calculus by which she weighed silence against truth. She understood why the Inquisition erased Bloodlines. She understood why absence must fall like a shadow across anything that threatened to expose the Emperor's torment. She understood, and still the whisper remained, "He is burning." Velena did not flinch. She did not look away. She simply stood with it. Because now she bore part of the truth. And truth is a burden one carries quietly, without witness, without record, without name. The blade must never tremble in the hand. But sometimes the hand remembers the heat of what it has touched. There are silences in the Imperium that are intentional. Sculpted, maintained, reinforced like the stone buttresses of a cathedral wall. And then there are silences that happen on their own. The kind that arise not from decree, but from absence. Something gone, something missing. Something that should be there but isn't, leaving behind a shape like a breath held so long it has begun to tremble at the edges. In Hive Callist, the absence of the Haldens settled slowly. First, the neighbors simply stopped expecting to see them. Then the Manufactorum corrected its rota calculations. Then the Administratum adjusted its record efficiency margins to reflect slightly altered workflows. Life continued. It always continued. But continuation does not mean forgetting. Not fully. It began with the Skola children. Not all of them. Only those who had sat near Leysa. Children who had once laughed with her, traded half-stale ration sweets, shared whispered commentary during morning prayers, stifled giggles during stern lectures from instructors whose patience had long since calcified into ritual. They could no longer recall her name. They could no longer picture her face. But they remembered something. Something like a warmth that had once existed among them, like a lantern that had been carried through a long corridor, illuminating just enough to make the path feel less cold. Now that warmth was gone, and children notice cold faster than adults do, small behaviors changed. One child began sleeping with the blanket pulled to their chin, though they never had before. Another stopped speaking mid-sentence, as if chasing a word they should have known. A third, who had always been first to recite his catechisms, stumbled over a single line that felt suddenly, inexplicably wrong. None of these things were large enough to draw attention, but silence does not need volume to spread. The Skola priests felt it too, a tension in the air, as though the room's warp of sound and breath had been stretched too thin. Their prayers felt heavier in the mouth. Their instruction felt like pushing against something unseen. They did not speak of it. Priests were trained to be the guardians of certainty, and certainty, once questioned, decays faster than flesh. Meanwhile, in the Manufactorum, Marek's absence was processed faster than memory could ache. Another worker replaced him. Another body at the conveyor line. But there were nights when a supervisor or line foreman would open their mouth to call out a name they no longer remembered having ever spoken. The silence after the misfired reflex was always brief, always smoothed over, always dismissed. The machine of production is very good at grinding down anomalies. Yet the silence persisted. Alira remained in her new clerk station. Her hands moved the way they always had. Swift, efficient, accurate. But sometimes when she paused between incoming Vox transmissions, a strange stillness crossed her expression. Not grief, not confusion. Something more hollow, like she had forgotten something important and was terrified to discover what it had been. But the mind is a treacherous organ. It protects itself. It seals over wounds it cannot survive examining. Alira did not dig deeper. She did not ask herself why her dreams felt like rooms with missing doors. She simply worked harder, devoted more completely. Faith was a balm she applied without understanding that what she was soothing was not a wound, but an absence. The hive continued, the prayers continued, the silence breathed. But silence is not always obedient. It does not always stay where it was placed. It moves, it echoes. It travels between minds the way dust travels through air, invisible until illuminated. and something had illuminated it. Not loudly, not violently, just enough. The whisper passed again. Not in words this time, in sensation. A tightness behind the breastbone, a sense of being seen from afar, a pressure like the moment before, kneeling, except no one had knelt and nothing had asked them to. These were not memories, these were not hauntings, these were resonances. Every mind is a chamber. Every chamber has acoustics. And when something brushes against the Emperor's suffering, something pure, something uncorrupted, something that simply witnessed, the echo of that touch does not vanish. It spreads, softly, slowly, unintentionally, and the Hive was beginning to feel it. Valina sensed the shift long before reports reached her. Not through psyker perception, she was no psyker, but through familiarity. The way a musician knows when a single string in a cathedral choir is microscopically out of tune. Something in the emotional atmosphere had changed. Something subtle, something dangerous. Not heresy, not corruption, something far more fragile. Memory trying to return. If memory returns, the silence breaks. If the silence breaks, the questions follow. If the questions follow, the Imperium hemorrhages from within. Valina stood in a high observation gallery, watching the hive lights flicker and ripple in slow mechanical breath. Her hands were steady, her face impassive. But something inside her, some exact, disciplined part, tightened. She had erased the traces. She had removed the roots. She had sealed the wound. And yet the echo remained. The Emperor is burning, not a corruption, not an invasion, a truth. And truths, once touched, do not die, they wait. Rumors in a hive city do not travel like speech, they move like heat. You feel them before you understand them. A shift in the way people look at one another. A hesitation in the middle of a sentence. A shared unease that no one has the vocabulary to name. It began in the lower canteens first, where workers gathered during short rest cycles, trading exhaustion instead of conversation. Someone would pause while unwrapping a protein ration and stare at the wall for a heartbeat too long, as though listening for something that had almost been there. Someone else would fumble a familiar prayer, words falling out of order, tone faltering as though memory were slipping beneath the surface of thought. No one knew why. No one could ask. Asking was the most dangerous act of all. But the silence was becoming aware of itself. There are patterns to psychic echoes, even those that never touch the warp directly. Even those that originate not from demons but from proximity to unbearable truth. When a child dreams of something they should not have known, something vast, something unbearably luminous, those dreams leave residue behind. Not visible, not chartable, but felt. Felt in the marrow of those who once knew the dreamer. Felt in the cadence of the liturgies recited in rooms that once held her voice. Felt in the uneven rhythm of breaths taken in the dark by those who cannot recall what they've lost, only that they lost it. Lisa Halden was gone, erased so thoroughly that her name no longer existed in any record. But erasure does not remove weight. It only removes shape. And what remains behind is pressure. And pressure seeks release. Valina tracked the echo through mundane signs. Nothing supernatural. She observed a Scola child lingering too long at an empty desk. She overheard a manufactorum worker pause mid-instruction, lips forming half-syllables of a name that no longer existed. She watched a priest falter during a sermon, eyes momentarily distant, as though listening to something far away. Not rebellion, not knowledge, just loss with no object, grief with no source, and grief that cannot identify its dead becomes something dangerous. Faith relies on certainty. Certainty relies on narrative. Narrative relies on memory, and memory had been taken. So faith began to fray, not loudly, not visibly, just enough to make the air feel thinner. Valina knew what came next if the echo was allowed to spread. Humans are not designed to endure existential voids. When confronted with absence they cannot explain, they seek meaning with fervor sharp enough to draw blood. And if they cannot find meaning in Scripture, they will search in whispers. And if whispers fail, they will search in dreams. And dreams are the warp's open door. Valina returned to the Ordo subvault. She stood before the Inquisitor who had overseen the Halden erasure. The woman's presence was the quiet of a sealed tomb, stillness so complete that motion felt like an intrusion upon a sacred crime. Her face was carved in austerity. Her eyes were not cruel. Cruelty implies pleasure. Her eyes held only the void that remains after every justification has already been weighed, processed, and accepted. Valina bowed her head, not in reverence but in alignment of purpose. "The echo persists," she said. A long silence followed, not hesitation, calculation. "Strength?" the Inquisitor asked. "Subtle," Valina replied. "Emotional, not intellectual, but spreading." "Warp-touched?" "No." "Origin?" Valina hesitated for the width of a breath. "Proximity to the Astronomicon," she said quietly. "Unauthored resonance, reverberation of the Emperor's pain." The Inquisitor's eyes did not widen, her breathing did not shift, but her stillness deepened, like a blade being returned to its sheath. Pain. The word itself was forbidden in reference to the Emperor. Doctrine allowed suffering only among the faithful, not in the divine. The Emperor was not permitted to burn. He was the light, not the fire that consumed to become light. Yet here they were. The Inquisitor turned, placing one hand upon an illuminated data sigillum, sealing the chamber from surveillance. The walls flickered with the faint blue shimmer of psychic dampening fields. Only then did she speak again. "It cannot spread," Valina nodded. "It already has," she answered. Neither woman raised her voice. Neither needed to. The understanding between them was absolute. What had been erased had begun to echo, and an echo cannot be removed by the same method that erased the source. This was not memory of a child, this was memory of grief. Grief that did not know its own origin. Grief without narrative becomes hunger. Hunger becomes searching. Searching becomes vulnerability, and vulnerability becomes a channel. If the Imperium fears anything, it is not heresy. It is the moment before heresy. The Inquisitor stepped closer. Her voice was soft. "Begin tertiary audit." Valina felt the temperature of the words in her bones. Tertiary audit, not removal, not execution. Restructuring of people, of belief, of emotion itself. A recalibration of faith. And faith, once tampered with, either strengthens or shatters. Valina bowed her head again, not as a servant, as someone accepting weight. When she rose, the silence did not feel empty, it felt alive. Tertiary audits were never recorded in any lexicon, no matter how obscure. Even within Ordo circles, they were spoken of only indirectly, referenced the way one references a wound by describing the scar, while refusing to recall how the skin was opened. They are not acts of destruction, but of rearrangement. Not removal of individuals, but adjustment of emotional vectors. The bending of internal landscapes until they align once more with imperial stability, with sanctioned belief, with the myth of a god who does not suffer. Valina had performed them before, twice, years apart. Each time required an understanding of human interiority so precise it felt like trespass. To conduct a tertiary audit is to enter the rhythms of a population's breath, to alter grief into gratitude, to turn confusion into relief. to take silence and adjust its resonance until it no longer calls out, but settles like dust on old stone. She began with the Schola. The children were gathered for evening catechism. Their young faces reflected lumen light, soft and wavering, like candles in a draught. They recited the creed of enduring vigilance, voices small but steady. Yet, when they finished, Valina did not speak to them of duty or faith. She sat at the front of the assembly, hands resting easily upon her knees, posture gentle rather than severe. She looked at them, not as a judge, as a witness. "You are faithful children of the Emperor," she said quietly. Her voice did not reach outward, it drew them inward. "You have learned his words, you have carried his light." Some of the children looked uncertain. They did not know why her presence felt heavy and calm at the same time. But they listened. "Sometimes," she continued, "we carry light without realizing it. Sometimes the Emperor gives us strength so quietly that we only feel it when it is gone." A ripple passed through the room. Not recognition. There was nothing to recognize, but resonance. Grief without object stirred, and her voice wrapped around it like a hand around flame. "You have felt something missing," Valina said. "Not a memory, not a person, only a warmth that once rested among you." A small girl in the second row inhaled sharply, like a heartbeat catching. Valina did not look at her directly. "It was not taken from you," she said. "It was given to the Emperor. A gift of devotion so pure that no language can hold it, no memory can bind it. What you feel is not loss, it is honor." Silence settled thick and warm. The grief softened, because now it had a name. Honor. A story that could hold the weight. That was the audit. Not the insertion of lies, but the resculpting of truth into a shape the mind could bear. Valina did the same in the manufactorum. Not through speeches. The workers did not gather for speeches. She let her presence linger where pairs of workers shared glances heavy with the outline of something missing. She let her voice speak in passing, the way a steady hand turns a misaligned cog into proper balance. Duty is sacrifice. Some gifts are too great to speak aloud. When something is taken to serve him, we feel its absence because we are close to grace. Small sentences, not commands, not orders, reframing, rethreading, realigning the internal architecture of faith. It did not erase the echo. It gave the echo somewhere safe to rest. The silence that had once carried a question now carried a hymn. But hymns can crack, hymns can thin. The priests proved more difficult. Priests know the shape of doctrine intimately. They feel when meaning shifts, even by a fraction. They are scholars of resonance. Valina approached the High Catechist privately, in the sanctuary where incense coiled upward in slow ribbons, and the great statue of the Emperor loomed overhead, its stone eyes unseeing and unending. The priest bowed. Valina did not. Neither gesture was disrespect. Both were acknowledgement of role. "The congregation senses something missing," the priest said before she could speak. "Yes," Valina replied. "Something taken?" His voice was soft, fearless, not defiant, disciplined. "No," Valina answered, "something offered." The priest closed his eyes. A tremor passed through his prayer-scored hands. "We are not meant to know his suffering," he murmured. "We are not meant to deny it either," Valina said. "We are meant to stand." The priest exhaled, long and slow. "What is required of me?" he asked. And in that question, Valina felt it, the pivot upon which faith can either endure or shatter. "No questions," she said, "only continuation." The priest nodded. He would preach subtly, weaving reverence into absence, teaching the congregation to call the echo devotion. He would perform no miracles. He would not speculate. He would only hold the silence steady. The hive shifted. Not back to what it had been. Silence cannot be reversed, but to something balanced. Grief no longer raw. Confusion no longer open-ended. Faith sutured to loss in a way that allowed both to survive. But as Valina walked the upper terrace again that night, feeling the hive breathe beneath her, she sensed it still. The whisper, not words, not memory, just presence, not gone, not diminishing. Waiting. She understood now. Silence does not end anything. It preserves the moment before, and what waits in that moment can return. Continue? Night in the hive did not mean darkness. It meant a different quality of light. A dimming of the vents, a deeper thrum in the manufactorum arteries. A hush, not peaceful, not restful, just the kind of quiet that settles when exhaustion has become the only law left to obey. Valina walked alone across a transit causeway suspended over what looked like an endless gulf of layered industry. Below her, conveyor lines glowed faintly red, feeding ore and processed slurry toward refineries buried kilometers downward. Above her, the ceiling was lost to shadow and heat haze. The hive was an inverted star, burning itself to remain alive. She paused midway across the span. The whisper did not come this time. The silence did. Not absence, not relief. Recognition. This was the moment where the echo, having been softened, reframed, and given meaning, should have dissolved. This was where the tertiary audit completed its arc. The hive should have settled. Minds should have realigned. The emotional disturbance should have resolved into reverent stillness. And yet, something remained. Not a memory, not a name, a direction. The way a compass needle trembles when a storm gathers far beyond the horizon where any eye can see. Valina rested one hand lightly against the railing, her glove brushing the cold steel. It vibrated faintly, not from machinery, but from the city itself, breathing the slow, endless breath of billions living and dying under a single emperor who would never know their names. She felt it then, not a voice, not even an echo, a yearning, reverent, fragile, unbearably human. It did not come from the warp, it did not come from the emperor, it came from the hive, from the people. Grief unmoored had not turned to despair, nor to rebellion, nor to searching. It had turned upward, toward him, a quiet, instinctive reaching, as though a million minds felt in some small, unspoken way that the emperor hurt, and they wished, not to save him, not to question him, but simply to stand with him in that pain. No doctrine allowed for that, no liturgy acknowledged it, yet here it was, small, pure, impossible, a devotion without instruction, a love without command. Valina felt something inside her, something she had spent years shaping into precision, shift in response. Not break, not soften, simply acknowledge. There was danger in this kind of reverence. It was unpredictable. It did not obey the strict geometry of sanctioned belief. If nurtured, it could become heresy. If suppressed, it could become despair. It was the spark of something that should not exist in a galaxy that demands obedience before understanding. And yet, Valina did not reach to extinguish it. She only observed it, witnessed it, carried it, the way she carried the whisper, "He is burning," a truth too vast to articulate, a truth the Inquisition would deny until the last star guttered out. But truths that are denied do not die, they persist, they wait, they echo. Valina turned away from the railing and continued walking. Her steps made no sound. Her mind was calm. Her duty remained unchanged. The hive would not collapse. The silence had been structured. Faith had been realigned. Life would go on exactly as it always had. But she knew now that duty had layers deeper than obedience. She knew that silence was not merely erasure. Silence was remembrance that could not be spoken. And she knew that somewhere in the vast ocean of humanity, more children would dream of the golden corridor. More would glimpse the burning light. More would feel a truth too immense to survive awakening. And when they did, she would come. She would erase them. She would erase their memory. She would erase the echo. And yet, she would remember, not fully, not clearly, not with names or images, but with the quiet knowledge that she had once stood in a Hive City night and understood that the Emperor suffered, and that humanity, unknowing, unbidden, unrecorded, had reached toward him. Not in defiance, not in worship, but in kinship. The silence was no longer empty, it was full of unsaid devotion, full of truths too fragile to speak, full of the weight of all humanity kneeling in the dark. There are truths in the Imperium that are never taught because they cannot be contained in words. They live instead in echoes, in instincts, in the aching space between fear and devotion. The Astronomicon is one such truth. The Emperor's radiance, blazing across the void, is spoken of in hymns as a beacon of infinite strength. And it is. But no one sings of what it costs. No one sings of the choir, of the psychers who burn like paper held too near a flame, their minds emptied into light. No one sings of the strain, no one sings of the suffering. Because to speak suffering is to imply weakness, and the Imperium cannot permit weakness in its god. But Valina understood now that suffering and weakness are not the same. Suffering can be endurance. Suffering can be faith. Suffering can be the only way light continues to burn when all else has fallen dark. She learned this not from doctrine, nor interrogation, nor battle. She learned it from the silence left behind by a little girl who never understood what she had glimpsed. The Halden case was closed, records reshaped, memories rethreaded. The Hive returned to its eternal cycle of labor, prayer, and exhaustion. No trace remained. The Administratum logged no anomaly. The Schola continued its recitations. The Manufactorum continued its drone song. The priests continued their liturgies without falter. Yet still the echo remained in the air, faint and enduring. Not a whisper now, a sensation, a warmth behind the ribs, a presence that asked nothing, demanded nothing, simply was. Valina did not report it. Reports are for facts. This was not a fact. This was a truth. And truths of a certain kind must be carried, not spoken. She returned to the Ordo Enclave only once after the audit to finalize codices and close classification seals. The Inquisitor reviewed her records with clinical precision. Every word was weighed, cross-referenced, and secured. When she finished, she looked at Valina with the same unreadable stillness she had always worn. "No trace remains?" she asked. Valina answered truthfully. "No trace that can be acted upon." The Inquisitor held her gaze. There was understanding in the silence between them. Understanding did not require agreement. Valina was dismissed with a gesture that was not dismissal, but acknowledgement of sufficiency. She left the Enclave and stepped back into the Hive's upper corridors, where the air vibrated with the deep, structural heartbeat of the city. Workers flowed past her. None looked at her. No one ever noticed the blade that worked in shadow. They were not meant to. She walked until she reached the transit tower that overlooked the central Manufactorum spire. The structure rose like a pillar of petrified fire, its outer plating streaked with centuries of soot and devotion. Pilgrims lit candles in alcoves carved into the ferrocrete, their flames fluttering in the drafts of industrial wind. They whispered prayers not for deliverance, but for endurance. She watched them. These were not powerful people. They were not psychers. They were not soldiers. They were the uncounted billions who filled the Imperium's arteries with labor and faith. They did not know what the Emperor suffered. They did not know that the light that guided ships through the void was fueled not by glory, but by agony. But they believed. And belief, Valina understood now, was not blindness. Belief was a choice made in the absence of certainty. The Emperor is burning. The words no longer felt like a warning, they felt like a vow. She closed her eyes, not in prayer, in witnessing. A memory rose, not of Lisa's face, for that had been erased, but of warmth. A presence, a sense of being seen. A moment in which a child had looked at her and recognized the terrible truth of what she was and had not feared her. Not because she was merciful, but because the child had understood the world was vast and cruel long before the Inquisition ever came. Valina opened her eyes again. The Hive lights pulsed like constellations. The Manufactorum roared like a living heart. And above it all, across the unfathomable void, the Astronomicon blazed. Not triumphant, but enduring. That was enough. Humanity did not survive because its God was unbroken. Humanity survived because its God continued, even while burning. Valina turned from the tower and walked back into the living machinery of the Hive. She did not need to look at the sky. She carried the light now. Not as faith, not as doubt, as truth. Not all truths must be spoken. Some must be lived. Some must be carried in silence. Some must be borne like a flame, cupped in both hands, shielding it from wind. The light that cannot be seen is the one that endures. Days passed, though in the Hive, days are measured not by sunrise but by the pulse and dim of lumen cycles. The air remained thick with heat and metal smoke. Conveyor sirens rose and fell with factory rhythm. The endless murmuring of prayer continued beneath every breath. Life, as it always does in the Imperium, arranged itself around necessity. Yet the echo remained, not as a wound, not as unrest, but as something quieter. A stillness that no longer trembled. A space held open in silent reverence. The Scola children no longer lingered at the empty desk. They did not remember why they had once done so. But when they recited their morning litanies, there was a softness in their voices, a cadence more gentle, as though the prayer had grown personal. Not dutiful, not fearful, simply real. The priests began adding a moment of quiet at the end of each hymn. Not a pause of discipline, a pause to listen, not to the warp, not to any voice, just to the feeling of standing together in the presence of something immeasurable. The faithful did not name it, they did not need to. Naming things limits them. This was something that could only be felt, and feeling it was enough. Even in the Manufactorum, where devotion was usually beaten down into functional monotony, something changed. Workers lifted their heads once in a while, not long enough to disrupt quota, only long enough to breathe in a way that felt intentional. The machine did not slow, but the people inside it no longer felt crushed quite so flat against its gears. They endured not only because they must, but because endurance had meaning. Valina moved through all of this like a shadow that cast no darkness. She did not interfere, she did not reinforce, she did not correct, she only observed. A blade sheathed is still a blade, but a blade sheathed can also be aware. She noted every shift, every softening, every change in the emotional architecture of the Hive, not to stop it, but to understand it. This was not rebellion. This was not instability. This was the shape of a truth too fragile to be spoken aloud. In the evenings, she walked the outer ventilation catwalks that circled the Hive's uppermost strata. They were open to the smog-thick sky, where the stars were faint, more smothered glow than points of fire. No one else climbed here, It was not forbidden, but few found comfort in heights that revealed how small they truly were. Valina stood there one night, feeling the wind that carried particles of metal and incense ash. The air tasted like iron and oil. It carried the weight of work and faith woven into one. Below her, the hive sprawled in layers too vast to comprehend. Above her, the void stretched across unthinkable distances, lit by the Emperor's distant, tortured glow. Not a beacon. A flare of pain turned into guidance. Valina closed her eyes, not to pray, but to listen. The silence answered her. No words, no command, just presence. And then, without sound, without voice, without even thought, she understood. Humanity does not love the Emperor because he is divine. Humanity loves him because he suffers for them. There is no glory in the golden throne, no triumph, only burning, endless, unending. And yet he endures. That endurance is what humanity sees even if they do not know it. That endurance is what they mirror every time they rise for another shift, every time they recite a prayer too old to feel, every time they grieve without knowing the name of what they have lost. Suffering, shared without being spoken, becomes unity. Unity becomes strength. Strength becomes survival. This is what the Imperium is built on. Not certainty, not victory, not enlightenment. Endurance, flame without fuel, burning because it refuses to go out. Valina opened her eyes. Far below, a pilgrim knelt at a shrine carved into rusted metal, lighting a candle that would be swallowed by steam in minutes. The act did not matter. The act mattered completely. Somewhere, a child dreamed. Not of corridors, not of light, but of warmth. Somewhere, a priest paused during prayer, not in doubt but in understanding. Somewhere, a mother held an ache she could not name, but held it gently now, not like a wound, but like a memory of love. Valina stepped back from the railing. Her duty had not changed. If another child glimpsed the unbearable, she would come. She would remove them. She would erase. She would keep the Imperium from fracturing beneath truths too large to bear. But she would do so, knowing what she protected was not merely obedience. It was the fragile, aching love of a species for the one who burns to keep them alive. She walked away from the edge. The whisper no longer followed her. She carried it. The hive's cycles continued, each lumen rise and dim blending seamlessly into the next. Valina moved through its arteries with the same quiet certainty she had always held, yet something within her steps had changed. Not their sound. She remained as silent as a blade sliding across polished stone, but the meaning behind their motion. Duty had never been a question. Now, it was also a vow. She passed through the manufactorum floor one shift cycle later, where hundreds of workers bent over their stations in synchronized exhaustion. Sparks leapt from welding lines. Promethium burners pulsed like slow mechanical hearts. Overseers walked up and down the ranks, shouting quotas and corrections, their voices hoarse and practiced. Ordinarily, no one would look up, no one dared. But as Valina walked the elevated gantry, a single worker paused. No recognition, no awareness, merely a moment in which his hand hesitated, barely, and his eyes rose toward a point somewhere above the machinery, above Valina, above the hive itself. There was no understanding behind the gaze, only longing, not for relief, not for change, for meaning. Valina stopped, not breaking her stride so much as allowing it to come to rest. One subtle motion suspended mid-cycle. The worker blinked once, then returned to his labor as though the pause had never occurred. But the instant remained. A faint shimmer, like heat in the air. She could feel it now, everywhere. Not a spreading infection. Not a crack. A tuning. Something in the emotional architecture of the hive had aligned with a truth too large to speak, The silence she had shaped did not erase the echo, it gave it form, and now it rested in the people, quiet, reverent, unspoken. This was not worship. Worship is taught. This was understanding born from pain, the same as his. Valina descended the gantry and crossed into the underhalls, where heat pipes rattled and vents thrummed like tired lungs. The atmosphere here was warmer, heavier. Lights flickered with the pulse of overburdened grid lines. She stepped into a maintenance chapel carved into an alcove behind a coolant tank. Pilgrims had scratched prayers into the metal, not elegant script, just worn marks left by desperate hands. One candle burned on a makeshift altar. Wax pooled across rusted steel. The flame wavered in the draft of machinery, fighting to stay upright. Valina crouched before it. She did not pray. She did not bow. She simply allowed herself to feel the warmth on her skin. A warmth that belonged to no miracle. A warmth that belonged to every life in the Hive. A warmth that belonged to him. She thought of Lysa, not as a face, for the face was gone, not as a name, for the name had been erased, but as a moment of impossible clarity, a point where the veil had thinned just enough for a child to see what no child should. She understood now why the Emperor did not speak. If he spoke, every voice in the galaxy would break trying to answer. Silence was not emptiness. Silence was love too vast for language. Valina rose. The candle flickered. Not from wind, from recognition, not of her, of what moved with her, the echo, not haunting, witnessing. She left the alcove and the flame steadied again. There was no need to tend it. It would burn as long as it needed to, as long as someone remembered the warmth, even if they did not know why. Valina found herself walking toward the transit shrine at the heart of the Hive, though she had not consciously chosen the direction. The shrine was small, tucked between a freight elevator shaft and a coolant reclamation tower, where pilgrims passed without stopping unless they felt some wordless pull. A statue of the Emperor stood there, no golden marble, no ornate cathedral filigree, just rough forged bronze darkened by age and exhaust. His face was calm, expressionless, almost indistinct, but his hand was extended, palm open, as though he were offering something, or asking for something in return. A small cluster of workers knelt at the foot of the statue. None looked particularly devout. Their clothes were worn, their hands were calloused. Their backs were bent not in reverence but in familiarity with pressure. They were the kind of people the Imperium never noticed unless it needed them to bleed. They prayed quietly, not in unison, not repeating liturgy, just speaking softly, as one might speak to someone who is listening. Help me endure tomorrow. Watch my son on shift 4. If I am to suffer, let me suffer with purpose. Not grand requests, not miracles, just endurance. They did not know he could hear them. They could not know. If they knew the truth of the Golden Throne, they would break. But they reached anyway, and something in the air, the faintest filament of presence, reached back. Not with words, with warmth. Valina stood at the back of the shrine, not approaching, not intruding. She watched, and she understood the shape of what she was protecting. Not power, not doctrine, not fear. A connection so delicate that it would shatter under scrutiny, yet strong enough to bind a species of billions to a single, burning presence across the void. A child had touched that presence, and the absence of that child had allowed the Hive to feel what she felt. Not clearly, not dangerously, just enough. Valina stepped forward and knelt, not because she sought forgiveness, nor strength, nor guidance. She knelt because there is a moment at the end of every duty where one must look at the thing they have protected and acknowledge it. She bowed her head. Her breath slowed. No vision came, no voice, no revelation. only the steady, quiet warmth behind her ribs, as constant as a heartbeat. Endurance. That was the light that could not be seen, not brilliant, not triumphant, not cleansing, just enduring. Burning without end, because to stop would mean abandoning all those who kneel and whisper simply, "Help me survive another day." Valina rose again. Her movement was fluid, unhurried. She did not look to the statue for approval. The Emperor does not give approval, he gives purpose and pain to match it. She turned and walked back into the endless corridors of the Hive, where labor awaited, where prayers continued, where silence held truth like a secret cupped in the hand of a sleeping child. Her duty remained. There would be more dreams, more echoes, more children who glimpsed what should never be seen. She would erase them because she must, but she would never again mistake erasure for emptiness. Some truths live in silence. Some love endures without name. Some flames burn not to be seen, but simply to keep the dark away. The Emperor is burning, and humanity endures because he does. End.